Welcome to the Tearing It Up podcast. I'm your host, Taryn. We'll be tearing it up, tearing it down, and tearing it apart, dissecting all things related to those who deviate from the standard. From leaders of their industry to leaders of mediocrity, and maybe a gear review or two thrown in. We shoot the shit and let the conversations flow, so if that's not your style, this may not be for you. Otherwise, listen in. Hope to light a fire in you somehow. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tearing It Up podcast. Today's exciting because we've got a guest and Amber. I know Amber has missed the last couple that we've had guests on. We've kind of been flip-flopping between the TNA conversations and then me and guests. So I'm super excited to have Amber with us and Tamara Jacoby of the Tailwind Jungle Lodge, also Thermal. And she also wrote a book, Wildpreneurs. We'll dive into all that, get more information on it all. I know for me, the Tailwind Jungle Lodge is what is just always on my mind. I mean, I found her through Wildpreneurs, the book she wrote through a friend of mine, M, here in Truckee. And when I read that book and read about her lodge, of course, this was 2020, I believe, I was instantly emailing her about setting up a retreat. I was like, this is a dream. Setting up a yoga retreat has been something I've wanted to do for a long time. And after reading her book and just feeling this kind of connection and it resonating with me so much of this person who feels the way I feel and things, like I have to use her space. So I started looking into the Tailwind Jungle Lodge, and I've just been following her the last few years since then, and I'm really excited to get to talk to her. She was also on Angie Marie's podcast For the Love of recently, and that's when I was like, yep, we got to get her on. So Tamara, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited you're here. Where are you?
Thank you, Taryn.
Oh, yes. Sorry, there's a little delay.
Well, sorry, I am in the jungle, hence the jungle Wi-Fi situation. I am on the Mexican Pacific, just north of Puerto Vallarta, so a little further south than you all in Truckee. Mm-hmm. Although I do miss the spring weather. It's getting quite hot here, and we are getting ready to head to Telluride in the next week or so. So packing up the family, closing up the lodge for the summer rainy season, and heading north.
That's awesome. How do you feel about, we'll dive into all sorts of things, get all the details and everything, but is it, you know what, maybe we'll wait on that question because I know it's going to come up, but we're going to start from the very beginning here and how a jungle lodge even comes about. I really want to start with your background on like growing up, how you got into the outdoors, everything like that. So where are you originally from?
Okay, so that is the very beginning, right? I was born in northern Vermont. I grew up on the border of Vermont and Quebec, Canada. So I'm actually American, Canadian, and now Mexican. I have two Mexican-born children, although they do not look very Mexican. My husband is American. But so I grew up in the Northeast, and then I guess where it really began is I was raised by extremely adventurous parents. Their idea of a family vacation in the summertime was to go backpacking for months at a time, or we did an extended bike packing trip on the Connell Divide. And I remember as a kid, we did Cape Breton on bike, and I think I was only 10 years old. It was like, let's pack up all of our stuff and our panniers right on either side of the bike, and yeah, you're going to carry the sleeping bags and the light stuff, but you're going to carry it all day. Okay, so that's what I did as a kid. And it was camping. We were always camping. So in the wilds and working together as a team, as a family, and pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones very consistently. So that was a huge part of my upbringing. And that carried on to, I went to college in Vermont. I went to Middlebury College, and I studied environmental economics and studied abroad in Australia, and was really inspired by eco lodges in Australia. They were kind of ahead of the curve there with the eco lodge kind of experience. And so right when I was getting ready to graduate, I was a senior in college, my parents stumbled upon this land here on the Mexican Pacific and fell in love with the jungle. And they were just captivated. And through all of our family's adventures, they had always dreamt of a vacation home in Mexico. My dad was a surfer in Mexico in the 60s. He came down here on his motorcycle from Alaska. And so always had this romantic notion of Mexico, always wanted land in Mexico. And so these two things collided where I was, very inspired by Eco Lodge ideas, and they found this land, and the light bulbs went off. And on my graduation weekend, I actually had written a business plan, and I pitched it to them right before I skied down the Middlebury Snowball in my cap and gown. I was a Feb grad, so I got to do the whole winter wonderland thing in my graduation attire. Anyway, it was just this beautiful collision, and my parents looked at my sort of slides and said, yeah, okay. I think they were slightly skeptical that we could actually pull it off. And I think I've spent the last 18 years proving to them that we could.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That is amazing.
So that's a very short version of a very long story. But yeah, we are on our 18th season here, and it's been a seasonal business every year. So we always close down this time of year, and it's a really great moment to reflect. And I was actually going through some old boxes and looking at our original brochure for the lodge from 2007 is kind of hilarious.
Yeah. 18 years. That is some congratulations are in order. That's huge. Way to go.
Thank you. It's either, victory or craziness that I'm still here. Yeah. Either way, we're still here.
Ebbs and flows.
That is huge. I'm wondering, since you grew up with like these very adventurous parents and you guys were going on trips all the time, and now with the lodge for the past 18 years, you've been pretty seasonal, as it doesn't make sense, it seems, to operate year round with the seasons down there. When you were younger, like, have you always just kind of been a seasonal person, like with other jobs and things, or before the lodge, did you have any kind of time period where you were pretty like on a regular routine, just like doing the same thing?
That's a great question. It's hard to think before the lodge because I was really a student, right? So I worked as a ski instructor. I never really had a real job. And then I stumbled into entrepreneurship, wildpreneurship, which is eventually what led me to write my book, because I felt like when I opened my lodge, I felt a little bit alone. I didn't really have my community here. San Pancho, which is the nearby community, and then Sayulita is just down the way. They were very different towns in 2005 when we first started building the lodge. Yeah. There weren't very many young international folks on the streets. There were some old retirees, that had been here forever and, just kind of expected to see them, but not many young people around. And so I had a hard time feeling like, supported, I think and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to write my book, was about 10 years into the lodge where we were finding, oh, this is working. We're having all these retreats come through, as well as families and couples and people who just really wanted to be immersed in the natural world and appreciated my family's adventure spirit. And people kept asking, what do I wish I had known? And, they had these ideas to do something kind of similar. There's this romantic notion of going to create a treehouse style lodge, off the map somewhere. And so I thought, well, I have some experience that I can share. And I also realized that it doesn't just apply to creating a lodge. It applies to creating any business off the beaten track, really. And as I've read a little bit about you ladies, I know that you have that same mentality of like, you just have to persevere, and it's hard on a daily basis. And even though it is romantic, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. And so I wanted to share that with others. And so hopefully that comes across in the no mud, no lotus mentality of wildpreneurs.
Yeah, I feel like it comes across. I mean, yes, the fantasy is always there, especially if you don't know the details of the day-to-day, but everything's a struggle.
Especially with little ones.
I was going to say, how old are your kiddos?
They're 2 and 4.
Oh,
how old is yours, your little guy?
I have a boy. He's 8.
Oh, so yeah.
We're past the toddler stage. We're full on in school and full of emotions and video games and all the fun things.
Yes. My kiddos this morning, they were really quiet and they were playing really nicely together. And I thought, oh, this is kind of unusual because we go through a lot of sibling challenges lately. And then I realized they were using a pink pen to scribble on a pillow. And they were taking turns.
God. Well, that's what they say, right?
Like,
when
interesting. Okay.
They say, like, when they're too quiet, something's up, right?
Yeah. Oh, man, they were totally... It was like a conspiracy going on over there. And they kind of knew, I think, they were doing something wrong. And then when it came to, okay, who did this? Oh boy, nobody was fessing up. So we were navigating some interesting emotional things and honesty and just pushing the boundaries. And again, it's like I'm out of my comfort zone in a new way, trying to navigate parenthood. It's a whole
Yeah.
different ballgame.
You're still on just that wild ride, which is part of being a wildpreneur, is it really never ends, right? It's always changing and evolving. And I mean, that can be the case in many aspects. When you have a certain job, like a salaried position, or you're employed by someone, yeah, things can change, but a lot of times there is more stability, and you just kind of know the day to day for a while. And I feel like with entrepreneurship, wildpreneurship, whatever you want to, however you like resonate with it, it's just changing day to day. As with parenting, obviously, because you're dealing with someone else's emotions or being in any kind of relationship. And so I thought it was so interesting that you're in college and you wrote this business plan as part of your as part of schooling, and then your parents were the ones who were like, hey, actually, like, this looks really cool, this is great, like, let's actually do this. That's got to feel great to have had their support. When you wrote up the business plan, were you 100% sold on it yourself, like, yeah, this is actually what I'm really gonna pursue?
Well, let's say I had very high aspirations of a luxury kind of situation. And reality was that we're not a good fit for that kind of experience. Our lodge here is definitely more rustic, adventure focused. And actually, in that dusty box of things I was just looking through, I got feedback from our first round of guests, which was like fairly harsh it was a tough one for me to swallow. Even though they had this epic experience, we made every mistake in the book with our first guests. We were just trying to do everything to excess. We tried to cook every meal. We tried to guide them to every one of our favorite places. We were on the go. Basically, we were trying to do this all-inclusive type thing, and we failed. And so, I mean, I don't know. I don't call it failing. It's artful mistake making, as I say in my book.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I needed to reframe that because I was having a hard time with coming from the mentality of success, and showing my worth and proving to my parents. And I don't know if you're familiar with the kind of the little Ivy Leagues of the East Coast, but it was like, you're just very driven to succeed. And so getting that kind of feedback was pretty hard on me, but it taught me so much. I grew so much, and it totally transformed really my idea of what we would create here. Because I realized it's also not just, if you want to make a lot of money, then maybe going the luxury route is a better idea, but it can also bring a lot of headaches too with the kind of clientele that you have to keep a certain level of service. And so tipping back from that, it meant less income, but also a better lifestyle for us. And that's been our mantra ever since then, really, is we got to the sweet spot with retreats where we can accommodate 14 in their own beds or 17 if they're sharing queens. And that's like a really nice size for small retreats. And we've had conversations of, oh, do we build more? And everyone's like, no, that's more maintenance, it's more work. I don't think that's not the direction that we're headed. So we're very happy with our little lodge, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, I love that. And with retreats, again, you're building I feel like it's definitely a learning experience in building your business, because like you have this idea of maybe what you want, this like romantic big version that this is how it's going to go and this is what it has to be. And then as you're starting to do things and maybe running into those, what the artful mistakes, is that what you called it?
Yeah, artful mistake making.
Yeah, artful mistake making rather than failures. That you're pivoting, you're learning like, okay, that doesn't work. And that's actually not what the people want, because you think these people will want this and you want to give it to them. But it really takes having those experiences and learning and being able to then know that reach your audience. And even with the podcast, I feel like we have been able to, it's also an ever evolving thing as we realize who our listeners are, who are the ones that are tuning in, and how can we, create something for them that also aligns with us, instead of just trying to please the people out there for a buck in your pocket. And you realize, especially with our society where you're just it's ingrained in us just to make money and the most money as possible to live this like life of luxury. But you see that people who are making more money aren't necessarily in a better situation, like with debt. They just take out bigger loans, they get bigger things, like things that they can't actually afford, like cash out of their pocket.
Involved with scary investors.
Yeah, so it's
it's an interesting cycle. And we've tried to avoid it, although also being part of the Telluride scene, and just what life looks like there, it's a bit of a shock to the system coming from Mexico. Although, it has crept into Mexico as well. The cultural things, it's kind of an interesting conversation. We can save that one for another day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I bet that's, well, especially like you mentioned where you are when you started, it was a very, very different towns, very different, like tourism aspect, all of those things. Because I know that even when I first started hearing about Sayulita from the first time that I went there, there was major differences from what people told me who had been going regularly. And that was only, a few year span, not 18 years. So navigating that as well, of just like the place you're in changing too, has got to be difficult, I'm sure. But like I said, it sounds like you're reaching the audience that you need to reach, that aligns with you by having these smaller, more intimate retreats. And you've created this like family. I envision like when you go to Tailwind Jungle Lodge, even if you're not there as a whole group renting out the place, right, that everyone there can just kind of connect and align, and it just feels like a little family that you're creating just being there, because everyone
totally
shares these same ideas.
Yeah, exactly. The same values, the same definition of what a real experience is. Basically disconnecting from the speedy world that we all live in and just slowing down. And we don't have Wi-Fi throughout the property. We do have it here at the office, which is where my family lives. But we actually really appreciate that our guests are not connected down below, so that it's an interesting shocker too. The first 24 hours, people, even though they intentionally come here and they know what they're getting themselves into, they're not used to that, where everything, all the constant input just goes off, and suddenly it's the birds and, the iguanas and the whales. And so there's a bit of a transition, but then once they drop in and they surrender and open up to it, it's so beautiful. It's one of the things that I really love about our place. Even though it's harder for us in some ways, people will come up in a panic, and then the internet flickers, and oh my gosh, I need to, and it's just interesting. But yes, so we do have a lot of solos who will come, or couples who end up hanging out together. And then we also have some who don't want to, and they just want complete isolation, and they want to be on their own, and that's fine too. Everyone kind of comes for their own journey in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be amazing.
How exciting to watch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly what I was thinking.
That like in real time transformation of people being like disconnecting, like full on disconnecting.
Yeah, we don't see that very
it is
much.
A beautiful thing.
Mm-mm.
It makes me realize I was lucky, as a teenager, and then even into my 20s with my parents. I think right before I started the lodge, my dad, for his 60th birthday, his wish was to kayak for 2 months on the Baja Peninsula on the Sea of Cortez, and into a wilderness that we really knew not much about. We had grown up kayaking. We live on a lake, so we know all about sea kayaks and all that. But he was like, no, we're loading up all of our food and our water, and we are paddling this coastline. Myself, my brother, and my dad. And so completely disconnected. And the maps that we had were pretty basic at best. You just had to see what was around the next corner. And I just realized what an incredible headspace that was. I basically, you just get into this Zen mode for 8 to 10 hours a day. You're paddling and so present. And I don't know what my mind did during that time, but I'm kind of wishing that I could get to that place again more quickly, because one of my challenges now is turning it off. As I juggle more as a parent, as a wildpreneur, also working with thermal, I support our guide community. So I work with our surf guides in 18 destinations. And I also am the head of our accommodation partnerships. So I work with our lodges in all these destinations. And it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of problem solving and human relations and variable, conditions. And it's awesome. but it ends up being a lot to process all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I need to go on another disconnect one of these days with the kids and just all of us.
Yes. Bring the babies. Start them young.
I mean, it's just second nature now in our society to be able to pull out your phone and answer an email or stay in touch, where it's like working remotely has given a lot of people a lot more freedom, but then it also has its own cons of now you can't turn it off. And I think often of traveling, like since I started driving, there has been navigation technology, like whether it was when I started driving, it was TomTom navigation, like this third party, like extra thing that you could plug in. I don't even remember how it worked or anything, but it wasn't too long after that iPhones came about and Google Maps and stuff, where when I was actually like getting far enough away from home or whatever. But when I was a kid and we traveled all over for wrestling tournaments. And I mean, my mom would go on MapQuest, print out a map, and she would be holding the paper map, and my dad would be driving, they'd be navigating. And I was just I think all the time about just the arguments that would happen, of like, you told me this street, or, like how you just don't know, you don't get the like 100 feet ahead or 1,000 feet ahead. You just have to really be aware. Or even traveling in somewhere so isolated, like your kayaking trip, you just have to see what's going on. You have to be so aware of your surroundings and not just be able to tune out and like wait for that Google voice to say, turn right here, because you have to be aware of actual dangers and weather changes and stuff, and the water things going around you. It's hard to just tune out and just like, yeah, you can zone out and just paddle, but you still have an awareness that these days I don't feel like we do. I feel like we just kind of turn off and wait for something to ping us, and we're like, oh yeah, here we are.
Yeah, and it's a scary one as a parent. Amber, I'm sure you've thought of this too, but I want my kids to be able to survive when they're disconnected. And if we're so dependent on our devices, which we look things up with them, I recently looked up the word beaver. I know this is random, but I was like, how do we say beaver in Spanish? A good friend of mine recently wrote a book all about beavers. Happy to recommend it to any kids. My son has read it every day for the last 2 weeks.
I love it.
Anyway, we're like, let's look up in the dictionary. Let's look up the word beaver and to find the Spanish word, and it wasn't in there. Like, that seems like a pretty basic word. Mm-hmm. Anyway, of course, then we go to the phone and you can find all the words that you want on there. And so my son is like, oh, books don't have it, but the phone does. And that's not really the lesson I wanted him to have, but
yes. But also, are there beavers down in South America? I think they have those like capybaras, or like they probably have their own, like niche ecosystem beaver.
That's a great question. I have not seen them around here. We have tejones. They're a jungle, like monkey raccoon kind of thing, but there's not a lot of beaver habitat in the jungle.
Yeah. But I feel like there's got to be something down in South America that fills that ecosystem niche.
Yeah, you would think. Well, anyway, for the record, they're called castor.
Castor.
Okay.
Castor.
I mean, that's a really interesting point of just, it wasn't in the books, but I can find it online, because that's something that's been talked about a lot too in the last, I don't know, decade, I'm sure, or longer, but how readily available information is. And before, it wasn't like, you'd have to wait for an update in the encyclopedia or in a dictionary, or something. And now everything is updated so quickly. And so how do you instill these lessons in children that you learned? Because it's a different way of learning. It's just a different way of learning. And you don't want to let go of these more, just these other ways of learning. But then we also kind of have to be like, well, it's not like it's going to be obsolete, but things are changing by the time they are adults. Like, this is just going to be the way that the world is for them. Even going out in the wilderness, right? Things like Garmin InReaches and all these satellite devices, you can be really in the middle of nowhere, but still be able to communicate or find a map or something, which is really, really great. But it is kind of weird where there's times you're like, okay, well, what if something does happen that everything shuts down, and I can't depend on anything? How will anybody survive? Those thoughts, they feel like apocalyptic, but you know what I mean? I feel like because of the generation that we grew up in with all the movies about that, we can't help but think.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one. You can go way down that rabbit hole. But I will say that my hope, and one of the things that I think I tried to keep in mind when writing my book, is that there are little nuggets that shouldn't go out of style, right? They're not so related to the technology aspect of being a wildpreneur, but more the lessons that come from experience, right? And so I didn't talk about social media in there. I talk about rogue marketing, which will never go away. I think always being creative and how you promote yourself is a good one. But it talks about self-care and, trying to keep yourself from burning out and just some of the things that I learned over the course of time here, but keeping technology out of it. And I wish I had had this book when I was in my early 20s. Honestly, it would have saved me a lot of grief. And maybe some of those lessons you just can only learn by doing. But I do hope that it lands in the hands of many college kids and those who are just getting started in their 20s and through their 30s. And I realize I'm at the 40 age limit. I saw your demographic here for tearing it up is more like 25 to 40. So I'm glad I snuck in right when I'm
well, that's just the core. That's where right now the larger percentage is, but not by much. I was just looking at our stats the other day, and it's not by too much that we go into 41 and beyond. So don't worry, you will not outgrow us. That's for sure.
Well, I'm hoping to relive my youth many times, let's say, without the stress that I went through when I was going through it for real.
Totally.
Because I feel like the 30s were wow. Having 2 kids and writing a book. My book came out when I had a 3-month-old baby on the weekend that COVID hit. I launched my book at the REI flagship store in Seattle, and I had originally sold out. I had all these events lined up with the REI flagship stores and also South by Southwest. And then COVID literally hit that weekend. I was speaking on the Saturday and the news hit that morning. And so I had 50% showing. People were still kind of wondering what this COVID thing was. But then book tour fell apart and it was back to the lodge with no guests and a very little baby. But then my book fell into the hands of Drew Patterson, he was one of the founding team of Thermal, which is this surf travel company that I work with. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. But basically, I'd never worked another job before. I went from lodge to writing a book to all of a sudden having someone ask me if, hey, we're 4 of us and we have this wild idea to start this surf travel business. And we think you could be a great fit for the team to speak to our guides and our accommodations. And it's like, yeah, okay, I would try something like that. And so instead of the book tour that I was planning, I ended up joining this startup. And that was 3.5 years ago. And it has been a pretty wild ride with many twists and turns. And I think we're getting close to something. We just started these surfer development programs. So if either of you ladies are surfers, these are really great for starting out. And also fixed date adventures, kind of like the backroad style for surfing. And so some interesting things happening. But with a startup, you just never know. So we'll see what comes around the corner.
Yep. I think that's part of it too. You got to be buckled up and ready for wherever the new endeavor will take you. Because you can have like with the retreat, you can have these grand ideas, but then reality clicks in and you're like, oh, well, maybe that isn't what is going to genuinely align with who we actually are. And I feel like when you're disingenuine, it just shows.
It shows. Absolutely. I remember reading the book, and I think you were talking about the idea of a family or starting a family. And then by the end of the book, it came to be that you were, but by the time you finished the book, then you were still pregnant, or did you have your first child before the book was totally to print?
No, so that was quite a journey. That's another story. So I started writing the book on a retreat in Nicaragua. I was solo. I didn't have a partner. I hadn't met my husband yet. And I was at a period of time where I could do, when this lodge was closed, I go travel. And so some friends invited me to a surf and yoga retreat in Nicaragua. There was no power, nothing to do between surfing and yoga except for sit in a hammock and write. Okay, well, that's good. And so I started my outline and then realized, well, there might be something here, but I could use some support. I have self-discipline, but when it comes to writing, it can get really wrong really quick. I needed someone to take a look through. And so I found a family friend who is a writing coach. And so I started working with her. And once a month, we would review my writing. And I know she reviewed my first chapter like 4 times. And she'd send it back and say, good try. Oh, okay. I guess that means I need to try again. And so that went on for 3 years. I worked on it for 3 years with her. And then finally she's like, Tamara, what are you going to do with this? Which I hadn't really thought that far along. I sort of thought, well, maybe I'll give it to my guests here as a resource. And she said, well, I think you should write a proposal and start sharing it with publishers, which for those of you who are budding writers potentially looking to be published, I'm not sure that was the easiest route. It took a lot of doing. I feel like writing the proposal was harder for me than writing the book. It's basically the business plan for the book. It's a 70-page, for me, it was 70-page documents with, everything you can imagine, from testimonials from other authors to marketing approach, to samples from the book. It just has everything in there. And I pitched that. I actually did get an agent who was not the one for me, not good alignment there. But then I continued to pitch my proposal to publishers whenever I saw an opportunity to do so. And I did that for a whole year. And I was starting to lose sleep over it. And I was like, what? That driven mentality of, I can do this. I can prove to everyone that I can do this. I'm not going to give up. And I went through this process where I talked to my husband about it. I remember he helped me revise my cover letter so many times. And I think he would tell you better than I would. But I was done. I sort of felt like, this is driving me slowly insane. Mm-hmm. And after just writing the book as kind of a hobby, it sort of felt like, why am I putting myself through this? So I let it go, and I sort of stepped aside. And then I had this newsletter pop up in my inbox. It's called The Writer's Oasis, for any of you who are looking to publish. They give resources to authors and open calls for submissions. And something popped up, HarperCollins Leadership, new imprint of HarperCollins, open call for submissions. And I thought, okay, well, click, I'm not going to do any work here. I'm just going to send it. And then it all fell into place. And they within 6 weeks, they picked it up. But then from there, of course, it took another year for the book to come out. So all together, it was a 5-year journey. Wow. And then to have it come out on the weekend of COVID was like, wow, interesting. Not linear. This is not at all what I anticipated.
Not what you planned, not what you envisioned.
No, all the bookstores were closed, right? Anyway, you can't think behind. You just have to think forward. And
totally.
And my book continues to I just got an email this morning from someone in the Azores who's asked me to be in their book. He's like, yeah, I read Wildpreneurs. We're doing something similar here in Portugal. Can you speak with us? So it's always good to receive those and realize, oh yeah, the book is trickling out there into the world.
That's so cool. Well, that's what we've been talking about lately, and what I've been kind of reminding myself of lately, again, being in an instant gratification society, that it is hard to remember the things. Just you can put something out there and you're not going to get something back right away. Or if you don't get something back right away, rather, like, it doesn't mean it's just over and done. I mean, you can meet someone and then months, years later, they come back around and offer you, maybe it was a position or something comes up that you can network and be together with them, and something comes from it. And so it's just planting those seeds. And I listened to a podcast recently with Mike Rogie. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he is the editor and owner of Mountain Gazette, this publication that comes out 2 times a year, big magazine. But he had this quote that was, crumbs make a cake. And I think that's the same as like planting your seeds, because you feel like just you can get so burnt out, all these little things, this effort here and there, and you're not seeing any results, and you're just like, okay, I'm done. And it sounds like that's where you were with the book, of like, hey, this was just supposed to be for fun. I never really sought out being a best-selling author, and then it became something, so I decided to pursue it, and now I'm putting all this effort in, losing sleep over it, and nothing's coming from it. Like, what am I doing? I'm just going to stop. And then that's when the opportunity, it's kind of, they say that a lot about, when you stop looking, then the thing finds you. As cliche as that might sound or feel, but it just when you're not racking your mind over something over and over and you're kind of relaxing a bit, you're allowing these things to come in. You're giving space for things to come in rather than you're just putting all this energy out there. You're letting some things come in. And it's just amazing that what you've put out there, you're still seeing the rewards from it, especially that it all happened during COVID and you didn't have the chance for like this book tour and to have this like really big launch of a book or anything that, well, years later, it's still coming through. And
well, much thanks to you ladies for helping me continue to spread the Wildpreneur wisdom.
Well, that's what's amazing about books is like, that's why I love books, that they just live on forever, you know? And people can read it. And again, it doesn't have to be about starting a lodge, right? It's just about inspiring people to kind of go after that dream that they have, especially if they're not happy with where they're at right now. And as you mentioned, you felt so alone when you started the lodge and you wished you would have known this or that. And of course we say, well, if you would have known those things, you probably wouldn't have had to write this book, right? Because you wouldn't have had to learn these lessons. We all have to learn lessons on our own, but it can be very, very helpful, obviously, to have someone who's been in the position that you are and be able to have kind of like a mentor or whatnot. And you're still always going to learn a little bit of your own things. But when you do have to really go down that road solo, you'll learn a lot more. And yeah, sometimes you're like, oh, I wish I could have had a little easier route there, but you've learned so much now, it seems, and
have taken the long way to some of those.
Exactly. Those lessons stick. Those lessons stick though. The ones that are like, oh, that was, I didn't know if I was going to come out of that one alive. Those ones stick with you, you know?
Yep. And that's where
they teach you the greatest lessons.
I've always said my spirit animal is a salmon because the salmon swims, upstream to spawn. And I just feel like I more often than not swim upstream instead of take the easy route. It's just like making things harder on myself because I'm just throwing a bunch of things, like a bunch of irons in the fire and stuff, and seeing what works or what I enjoy, or if I stopped enjoying it, I'm like, well, but time to move on to the next. And how do I create something that is like mine and what I want and what aligns with my life right now in this moment. The podcast Amber and I just recorded that will, at this point you're all hearing, it'll be a couple of weeks before this, but we mentioned, that at any point in life, you should be able to change your mind. Like it doesn't have to be looked at as a midlife crisis. You can pivot and take that path, especially if you already haven't had a linear path, then why not just keep squiggling along, And it sounds like with thermal,
you seem to be very natural at doing that. Looking through your quick look through all the many hats you've worn in different roles, Taryn, I'm impressed. I do not have the same experience with a lot of different roles. The things that I've done for long periods of time.
Right.
So I feel like I could learn a thing or two from you about how to quickly pivot when the time comes.
I just do it, I guess. And I just have always had like operated by like a switch. And when the switch goes off, it's off. And it's just like time to do something else.
Yeah.
And it reminds me when my brother was more of a artist, like he was good at drawing and painting and stuff. And my mom always called me like her Picasso. That was just like all over the place. Like I didn't color in the lines, things were everywhere. And I was just imagining like my roadmap of life is really just like a bunch of squiggles. And like there's no direction. It's like going in spirals at times, like, oh, we did this already, but we're back over here. But I just think that that's okay. And we can definitely go when sometimes it feels like we're going backwards. We're not, because it's to get you somewhere else. And it sounds like with thermal, that was a start for you. And here you'd done the lodge and written a book, and now you're starting up something new again, and being unsure of where it's going to go. But that didn't stop you from taking on a brand new endeavor.
Yeah. I think I just dove into the thermal thing, and they saw something in me that maybe I didn't even see, is, hey, that I could work with these guides. We have, like I said, we have destinations all over the place. And I have done some guiding myself for guests at the lodge with kayaking tours and a little bit of surfing here and there. So I kind of know that world. But I have learned so much through communication with them, and just there's been a lot of figuring out. And as a startup, we didn't get it right out the gate. In fact, we built this whole marketplace, and that wasn't the right direction to be headed. And so we did a whole pivot in about a year and a half ago to adventures, which is more custom group trips, or private trips, excuse me. And now we're going into more group trips with fixed dates. So there's all these different seasons of thermal, trying different things. And I think we offer something that's really valuable to the right kind of client who wants that, basically pre-established adventure. Instead of having to do all the research and logistics on their own, we offer them that's something very simple. A trusted local guide to give you the best possible experiences, to get you to the best break at the right time, and accommodations that we know people will be comfortable. We have a few different options, from like the Tailwind Jungle Lodges to the more eco boutique to the more resorty options. And so we've done all the legwork there, and we just make it really easy for people to go and enjoy their experience. And so it's almost like a modern twist on travel agents for the surfing world, with these kind of special groups now mixed in. So as I articulated, I realized, we've tried a lot of things, and now we've landed on something new, which we just launched yesterday.
Oh, wow.
You have to check it out. It's our first go at a fixed date group trip. So there's 4 spots on this Oaxaca trip. So if you know anyone who's an experienced surfer who wants to go explore the gems, the waves of Oaxaca with a local guide who will get you to the best spot, then this is the trip for them. They can sign up as a solo or, bring a friend. But our guide there is pretty outstanding, and we're very excited to see where this goes. So take a look.
That is very
awesome.
Cool. We'll definitely be linking all that. I mean, I still have a dream of not only putting a retreat on, but just participating in a surf yoga retreat. Definitely. Amber just went surfing recently, actually. They've been very few and far between for me in my life, but
and same.
Yeah, I want to be a surfer so bad. I haven't lived in the places.
Yeah. But also, Washington surfing is so much different than doing it in warmer weather, because you have the damn wetsuit. It that alone is a sport in itself. And then just the waves are so different. And then, it's such an effort to get to the coast and rent all the gear if you don't have it. And it's great. I'm so glad that I continue to do it. But every time I'm like, oh, I got up on a knee. I got up on 2 knees. I got up. and then I'm like, how do I read the waves? I think that's the thing that I need to hone in, because I'm pretty sure we were just caught in an undertow, and we're just kept getting pulled to this one section, and it was all whitewash, and we're like, this will do. But
yeah, actually, that's a huge point. We just did a training with our guide here in Punta Mita, which I will note. Side note, we had originally focused our adventure here on Sayulita, but due to just overcrowded craziness, we moved out to Punta Mita, which is a much more laid back vibe, better surfing, all the things. So Punta Mita is the place to go. And our guide here, he did a webinar for people who might be interested in coming to his surfer development program. And it's basically everything that you want to know so you avoid all the bad habits.
Yes.
I've been surfing forever, and I make all the classic mistakes. I'm a very bad surfer. And so listening to our guide here talk about the things like, oh yeah, I definitely do that. I'm totally on the wrong track here. And that's what's valuable about this in the 3 or 4 days, is to learn all the things that will help you get out of those bad habits. And reading the waves was one of those things. He's like, listen, almost standing up on the board is secondary. You need to be able to read the waves. That's the key to surfing. And
that's the catalyst.
He said surfing is the easiest sport in the world if you have the right tips. If you have the right foundation, it's very easy. I've had people tell me I make surfing look so hard.
That's usually not what you hear, right? They're like, oh my God, you make it look so easy.
And it's true. I think I'm just doing all the wrong things, right?
And so hilarious.
There's a lot of sports you can kind of muscle your way through, there's not a lot of form to be had. I'm sure some people would disagree, but for trail running, or cycling, you can do it. And I'm an endurance athlete and I love those things. But when it comes to surfing, you just can't muscle your way through. You need somebody to coach you to get it right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So much to do with timing and all these other variables that, yeah, there's, of course, tons of other sports that have a lot of different variables and timing aspects and whatnot. But surfing's, I think, the only one that I've actually tried
Whole
that
nother ball
involves a
game.
lot of those.
You're working with live ocean. It's like constantly moving and ready to just whip you. Get pitted. It's ready to just pit you.
You mentioned just now being a endurance athlete. So I was wondering what outside of business, what is it that you do with the family and on your own? Like what, and obviously you're surfing. What else are you doing there in the jungle?
Well, I've always been a runner. I did marathons in college. That was my stress relief outlet. I've always loved that. And now post babies, I did my first half marathon recently, and I'm looking at maybe doing a triathlon this summer because I do distance swimming in the lake. We live on Lake George in the summer, which is in the Adirondacks of New York, and it's just the clearest, most beautiful water you've ever seen, and it just makes you want to swim forever. And so
Yes.
I've done some big distance swims already. So I'm like, oh, it's probably time to start getting back on the bike. And it makes me think of actually one of my mentors, and she's in the Tahoe area. I don't know if you know Megan Michelson. She created or co-created the Tahoe Mill Collective.
Yep.
Her husband is Flylo Dan. I call him. He's the founder.
Yes,
of
that's what
Flylo.
I call him too.
Yeah, and so Megan went to college at Middlebury also. And I met her when I was a freshman and she was a senior, and I was so inspired. And she was the head of the triathlon club at Middlebury. And so she got me out on my first triathlon, and since has done some pretty epic events and trail runs. And I know she's had a couple kids. But anyway, if Megan happens to listen to this, I have so much gratitude for her. And I'm due for a trip back to the Tahoe area to see her and her family. And yeah, and you can read her forward at the beginning of my book.
Yes. I saw that. I remember seeing that, and I had, I don't know if I've personally met her, but I worked at a cafe that is in the building that was under the mill. And I have rented a desk out at the mill. And so, yeah, Flylo Dan would always come down. That's how I first met him. And then I worked at a retail store that sold Flylo. So I just could never not say Flylo Dan, but,
Right?
I've
It
read
just
Megan's,
flows. Flylo
yeah,
Dan.
exactly. I've read Megan's work though. I know she writes for a few different publications and whatnot. But I thought that connection was so cool. That's another thing that got me that just really threw me into your book, and this woman has got stuff to say that I have to hear. So that was a great connection. And oh gosh, what was I going to say about this swimming and biking and getting back into a triathlon? I mean, that's huge. Are you ocean swimming then at all when you're down there?
I have in the past. I will say it's a little harder to just go out for a big solo ocean swim. There's a few factors we do have some jellyfish around here, and when you're swimming and your head is down, it's very hard to see them. And so especially alone and knowing, oh, I have these little kiddos I definitely need to come home to.
Yeah.
I think there's a little less ego in a lot of my pursuits now. It's a lot more about I need to enjoy myself. There needs to be a little less risk, and I just want to make sure I get home to take care of my little ones. And that's been good. I think, maybe this is the 40-year-old me, but I'm just slowing down a little bit. And looking at the triathlons, I was like, oh man, I would love to do the half Ironman, but that would not be smart for me right now. I am going to do the Olympic length one. Even though I know I could, push myself to do that extra. I was like, but then I won't have energy left over to play with my kids. That's no good.
Well, that's just having that self-awareness. Again, maybe it comes with, it definitely comes with age. I wouldn't say it's a certain number that you hit that you realize it, just with life experiences and doing things, because this again is what Amber and I just talked about recently, is just kind of letting go of this ego instead of feeling like I could do this crazy pursuit, but I don't really want to, because I have all these other things in life that are going on now too that I want to have the capacity and energy for. And so instead of feeling down on ourselves, I should have done that crazy hard trail or this long ass trip, and if I don't do that, then it's not worth it. It's no, whatever you enjoy doing is worth it. It was actually a card, but I framed it, and it says, time you enjoy wasting is not wasted time. And that always sat with me because it's like, yeah, if you're enjoying just doing nothing and reading a book or just relaxing because you've just been go, 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 that's not wasting time. Like, you're taking time for yourself. If you just went on a short bike ride, that wasn't a waste of your time versus going on a long bike ride. But I think with us, the three of us here, and our listeners, and maybe your audience as well, is that is something we all have a struggle with, is this ego letting go, because we are driven people. We do have many different interests, and it's really hard to kind of bring things back down and not be hard on ourselves.
Especially once you reach that limit where you're like, oh, I've pushed it. What else? What else?
Yeah,
It's
what's
hard.
next?
Yeah, it's hard to reel it in.
Yeah, you don't want to feel like, okay,
Yeah,
I've hit my peak and now I'm done. Like, what?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and that's an inner conversation that I have with myself a lot, right? When you accomplished a lot of the things that you do set out to do, is that constant needs for the what next, you know? And there's a passage called the flying trapeze that it just springs to mind. It's like the letting go of one trapeze and reaching for the next trapeze and being uncomfortable in that middle zone. And
Yes.
I think sometimes, and lately, that's a bit of a fear for me, is, you know, with parenting, there are all these different zones where you're reaching for the next one, and there's this discomfort that doesn't really ever go away. It's just kind of part of it. But then to add that on top of that is, it starts to, you reach your capacity for it pretty quickly. And so for me, there's this unintentional or maybe intentional sort of clinging to some things that may not be serving me anymore just because they're comfortable and I'm used to them.
Yes.
And so being brave enough, or, you know, confident enough, or at peace enough to let them go and know, okay, the next thing will come when it's time, and not to push it. That's something that I'm working on a lot. And that might've been a lot of words to share something that's very simple, I think, is just being okay with just being. Instead of, you know, being in the productivity, like performance zone, is just slowing down and just being. That's been a thing for me forever that I've not been great at. And with little kids, they're just this huge reminder of just being. They're like, they are just so happy to just do the simplest things. They get so much joy out of it. And that's what I want to do, right?
Yeah. Especially with the phase that the ages that they're at right now, like everything is so slow and like so new, and their world is so big, and there's so much to show them, but you got to like hone in and just focus in on like the small little things that they're looking at in that moment and be like, this is okay. But I remember struggling with that as a young mom, being like, oh, but I want to go ride bikes and take you to do this and all these things. But it's like, you have to slow down and go at their pace, which I think really helps with that. If you can, if parents can come to terms with that, you know, it can be a beautiful thing.
Well, Amber, wouldn't you say?
Just...
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just, you're still kind of dealing with that even now. Like, now that Quincy's a bit older, but he's still a kid, that you're like, okay, we can go a little bit further now. But would you say it's still kind of a struggle at times where you're like,
absolutely,
you have to make sure you're like, okay, wait, I still can't push him like that far. Like, I do have to, like, a constant battle until they're sending it further and faster than you
until they're teenagers and then outliving you. Yeah, we went mountain biking this weekend, and I mean, like, his wheels are tiny, or his gear crankshaft thing, like, just like physically it's harder. And I'm just like on my bike. I'm like, this is nothing, but it's like, for him, it's so much different. And it was just another thing of like slowing down. And I've really gotten better over the years of being like, okay, we're not going to finish this hike today. Okay, we're not going to send it as hard today. And that's fine. Like, I would much rather try my best to listen to my son and let him lead the way than to be like, come on, let's push it, dude. Like, that's just not fun for anybody, because then there's tears and resentment, and then just that animosity between you and your kid. I try to avoid that at all costs.
And potentially turning them off of this thing that you love and do want to have a connection with them for a lifetime. You know, they're like, no, fuck biking, I'm never doing this again, because that time that my mom just kept pushing me.
Yep, exactly.
Well, you
Love
just
it.
don't know how it's going to roll, right? Thinking back to where we started our
True.
conversation and the way my parents raised me, I was miserable a lot of the times, but they pushed me so far that I eventually learned to love it. Kind of
Yeah.
interesting, right? It's like
Same.
I did it
Mhm.
so much that it became second nature, and now I'm an endurance athlete because that's what I was raised with. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's not a normal day unless you've been for a 10-mile run, basically.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to dial that back. I've spent my whole life trying to dial it back, and so this is an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
You just never know. You never know what you're gonna get. I mean, I still feel like I don't know what I'm gonna get with myself every day that I wake up. Like, is it gonna be a 10-mile day, or is it gonna be a sit on the couch day? Like, I just don't know. It's usually not the sit on the couch day, but you know what I mean. Well, before
Some days those hit.
Yeah, sometimes you're just forced to because everything is, you've hit your limit. So trying to not get to the burnout stage is something I'm in a constant battle with for sure. But before we wrap up here, I have to apologize because at the beginning I introduced you as Tamara and realized you pronounce it Tamara.
All good. You're not the first one. And in Mexico, they say Tamara. So my husband introduces me to his family as Tamara. And so you kind of got it right if you were speaking in Spanish.
Yeah, there we go. Awesome. I like that. Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give you the opportunity to let people know where they can find you, leave the audience with any nuggets if you would like to. You already have left us with so many. Again, there's so many things I still want to dive into. This happens every time with every guest. And I'd love to have you back for sure to talk more. But let us know where the best place people can connect with you is and how to find all your adventures.
Yeah, so I mean, we covered a lot of ground here. Thank you for raising some really great points of conversation. And you can obviously find me here in the jungle, the tailwindjunglelodge.com. I'm the person who receives all the reservations and all the messages there, so you'll hear from me quickly that way. Wildpreneurs.com. You can find Wildpreneurs on Amazon and all your favorite booksellers online. Used to be available in REI. I've not been to the States recently, so maybe still on the shelf at REI. And then Thermal for surf adventures, whether you want to go and learn as a beginner or you're an experienced surfer looking for pretty epic surf adventure solo or with a group, that's thermal.travel. And so you can find all the information there about our adventures. I'm not much on social media, but I do have some Instagram accounts for Wildpreneurs and Tailwind Jungle Lodge as well.
Awesome. We will link all of that in the show notes so everyone out there can go find her. I will, as I've been saying it yearly since I read your book, that I will be looking into making a reservation in the fall when the lodge opens back up. And I've also meaning like before I just do a retreat, I just need to go. So Amber, maybe we will be doing a Tearing It Up trip in the fall because I love that. We both recently in the last couple of years went down to the Sayulita area for the first time. So I loved it and definitely want to go back down and be where you're at, where it's a little bit quieter and anywhere you suggest. So we'll be putting it on our calendar to come visit you for sure.
Well, and you may see me in Tahoe in the not too distant future. It's been a while since I was back there. Actually, one of the co-founders of Thermal lives in Truckee. I should connect you with him.
Oh, really?
Ryan. Yeah. He's a new Bay Area now, kind of working on his house in Truckee. Anyway, I'll send you a message after we wrap up. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to share any of my experience with the listeners. Would love to hear your wild ideas, and just go for it, right? Don't be afraid. I think one of the things that I was sharing, even feel the fear and then, do it anyway is the cliche. Yep. But I mean, say I think if I was to leave you with one thing is what's your action step right now? Maybe you have a wild idea and maybe it's a big one and maybe that's what's keeping you stuck. Is you could take a baby step, is think about what's the first thing I can do to further myself on that journey. And then before you know it, you've taken a bunch of steps and it turns into something. You just don't know until you try.
Build the cake.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again so much. We hope to chat with you soon. And everyone out there, stay tuned. We'll talk to you all next week. Bye.
Gracias. Adios.
Adios.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and would do us a huge favor, since we don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and would rate and review us on whatever platform it is you use, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, whatever it is. And if you're listening and downloading just through the website, tearingituppodcast.com, leave comments. We'll definitely engage back with you. And on social media right now, we're just on Instagram. Tearing It Up Podcast is the handle. Like the post, share the post, comment on the post, whatever it is you got. Show us your love so we just stay relevant and show up in the rankings at all. So again, rate and review, please. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.